It's a year and 3 months since the raids occurred on the 4 baths, and just under a year when it occurred on the other 2 baths. In total, those 6 baths being raided had 304 people arrested. Now, to date, in court, we have seen 170 trials. Of those 170, 3 decisions still have not come down from the judges. They've been adjourned to a point in the future, and yet more arguing is going to go on, and a decision will come. Out of the remaining 167, we have won 139. However, we have lost 28. And of those losses, 11 cases have been people who went in and pleaded guilty. And I'm afraid that tomorrow there's another one, but we'll have to deal with that later. People whose lawyers didn't really think that they had a proper defense, people who really weren't a part of our community, didn't have the support. I grabbed one man just before he was about to plead guilty, and I told him to sit down, be quiet, and I'd look after his case, and we won it. And however, they're starting to pick at us a little here and a little there, a little over there, and it's sort of almost as if we forget about the fact that we're still under attack. It's really important for us to be aware of the fact that Glad Day Bookstore was raided, the fact that the Bawdy Politic was raided and is probably going to experience charges. Gary gave us a wonderful intellectual analysis of what happened. I'm going very much for the personal, because I was not the intellectual, I was the worker. And as in that case, and now I've actually brought props with me, which I don't think anyone else has. This is about the Bathhouse trials. And so last year, the Canadian Lesbian and Gay Archives had a Pride exhibition which was called Queering Spaces. And they printed a whole bunch of towels, and I've asked them to be brought here because what are we going to do with all these towels? All we need is one. So I'm going to ask people to pass them out. Those that want to take one, put it in your back pocket, wrap it around your shoulders, and here's a souvenir of a time in history when we walked around the halls with nothing but a towel wrapped around us. And on that note, I would like to make a point that except for the fact that I wasn't in the bathhouses that night, I would have been arrested because I was a slut then, and not much and not much has changed since. I'm still a proud slut. I also want to talk about the fact that we did not have the internet at the time we were organizing. We had telephones. And that's how we organized all of the defense. And so I'm just going to give you a little scenario of how this worked. When an event was going to be announced, people would get on the phone, and you'd have about 5 to 10 people who you were supposed to call. So you picked up the phone, you called them, and very quickly you begged for an answering machine. You really did, because otherwise the conversations could go on for a long time. And you would let them know, demo here, place, time, get there, send your friends out. And then those people would have a list of 5 to 10. And those people, that's how we communicated. That's how we organized meetings, and that's how we organized demos. So we didn't have the internet, we had our own voices. But at the same time as we were organizing, we were also developing relationships with each other, and we were making friendships, and we were caring about each other. Because that was also the time where HIV was first coming into our community, and people were getting sick. And so when I would call someone, I would say, hey, John, this is the event. How is Peter doing? Do you need help? So we were caring as well as organizing. Sorry, it was a very emotional time for all of us. I want to go back a little bit just to before the Bathhouse trials. It was a fractious time within our community. We were not all of a single voice. There were people who felt that some people were too radical and others were not radical enough. And so there was a lot of community groups that, I don't really like them over there, and they're to this, and they're doing this, and you know, the bawdy politic is this, and the other group over there is doing that. When the Bathhouse raids happened, whew, we all were on a level playing field. We'd been attacked. Our community was attacked. And it wasn't just the queer community that came out, the straight community came out en masse. And we had a huge demonstration the first night. Now here again, I'm going to go into a little bit of my personal life to talk about the organizing of that first demo. I was starting my own bakery at the time. So the night that we were handing out the flyers, which was the night of the demo, I'd thrown a set of cheesecakes into the oven. I set the timer for exactly such and such a time, noted it on my watch, ran over to Buddy's, which was only a half a block away, was standing out, handing out those flyers, which had no date on them, tonight, just handing out the flyers. When it was close to, I raced home, pulled the cheesecakes out of the oven, raced back. The Right to Privacy Committee's strongest suit was the people who were involved, because people with different skill sets came out and took on different responsibilities. How I got into the Legal Defense Committee, not the Gay Court Watch. Please, wash that out of your memory. Gay Court Watch happened after. It was the Legal Defense Committee. I don't know, I didn't have any law experience, but we had so many lawyers who came forward and offered their services. I think we have a list of, Tom, can you tell me exactly how many lawyers? It was like 20-some lawyers? More than that? Okay, well, we had more than these lawyers who had come forward to us, volunteering their services, willing to do it pro bono, not expecting money, but the organization, the Right to Privacy Committee, did raise money and gave them portions of money towards their bills. But people who came forward were very skilled. And one of the things that we learned really early was keep the message simple. So we worked on that principle in terms of informing people, dealing with the media, or getting people out to events. We really focused on what our message was. I want to talk a bit about the courts, because that's where I spent a lot of time when I wasn't in my bakery. I would quite literally throw a bunch of cakes into a box or ice them in the morning before court, because court started at 10 o'clock and you had to be there at 10 or else you were really in trouble. Did whatever I had to do to get my business going, and then raced off to the courts with other people who worked with me on the Legal Defense Committee, Philip McLeod being one of them. And we would stand out in front of the courts, we'd get the docket, and we'd look down, bawdy house, or found-ins or keepers, people who were charged with those. And we would go around, John Doe, John Doe. John Doe would stand up and come over to us. We would then describe what the Right to Privacy Committee was. What we asked them to do is not plead guilty, just set a date for whatever time in the future. But we had lawyers who were willing to work with them. And if they could give us their name and phone number, no email addresses, we would get back to them, or they could communicate with us so we could connect them with a good lawyer who would do their defense. After court was finished, race home. I would take whatever cakes I had boxed or needed to ice, throw them into a car, race them off to the restaurants that I was supplying, come back, start whipping up batter for the next batch of cakes or pies or whatever I was doing. Meanwhile, I was on the phone to the lawyers or to the found-ins or to the keepers of the next day. And I had this huge, long cord, which was always in the cake batter or in the icing. It was, it was the sweetest telephone cord in the city of Toronto. And I'd be talking to, let's say, a lawyer. Rebecca, you're before Judge Perry tomorrow, and what he's going to be looking for is, and he accepts as blah, 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 and if you don't have the case law, I've got it in my briefcase, because I always carried a briefcase with me. And so I would be in court, and if one of the lawyers was fighting a case and they didn't have the case law, they simply looked over at me, and I would say, 3 copies, and I would hand them the 3 copies. And that's how we really worked that. And it was really a community building experience. I became really good friends with the lawyers, and I trust that they felt the same way towards me. And I always had the best attendance at the Legal Defense Committee because I always provided sweets. So people came for the sweets, if nothing else. But actually, no, we really, really did work together as a committee. And we picked out some very specific issues that we needed to fight around. One was, can the cop identify you when you're in court? If you can't be identified, well then, how does this cop know that you were actually at that location and should be charged for this situation? Or, did you have a lawful excuse? Those are just two examples. And I'm going to use the first one as an example of how we use that to our advantage. For example, I had an Asian man that was going into court the next day call to Richard Fong. Richard, I know you're involved with the gay Asians. Can you get a whole bunch of Asian men into the courtroom tomorrow? Or whatever date. So we plastered the courtroom with blondes, blacks, Asians, whatever it was that we could figure out to get them in the tracks of not allowing them to pick out who was, the only Asian man in the room. I'm sorry, no, we didn't give them that option. So we were thinking out of the box, and we organized, and we got to know a wider diversity of our own community. And let's see, where are we going here? The cases started out at Old City Hall. Then they moved to College Park. And then the courts got really tired of us taking up all their space there. And then they sent us way out to Scarborough. So those of us that were doing the attending at court had to keep moving our location and getting further away and following them. When we got out to Scarborough, one of the things that was really interesting is that there was a window in the door at the back of the courtroom. And Philip, who was with me, and I was up the front sort of watching what was making notes and all that sort of stuff, Philip noticed that when the cop was excluded, he was looking through the window to get a view. So Philip just walked up, stood in front of the window, cut the view. So we were creative on our feet as well. The judges hated these cases. They absolutely realized that this was a total waste of their time, court time, and all the public money that was going to it. So they would use almost any reason for dismissing these charges. And they did. Some of the cops were embarrassed, and they may have been able to identify the person, and they chose not to, because they realized this is a way that they could get out of it. Some of the prosecutors did their job, and some of the prosecutors enjoyed their job because they were homophobic, and this was their way at getting back at the faggots. And there was one incident where I mentioned in the video, I actually had hair and a beard, color, that there was one case that I thought we were going to lose the next day. And that was of an individual who I knew did not have a lawyer. We'd never been able to make contact with them. And there were a total of 13 of those individuals. And this is the first person that came in. I was completely flummoxed. I didn't know how to deal with this. He walked in. He identified himself. The judge asked him, "What are you going to do?" And he says, "Well, I don't know. I guess I'm going to plead guilty." And I was like, oh my God, my heart just sunk. So that night when I went home, back on the phone, whipping up another cake, talking to one of the lawyers, "Susie, what am I going to do?" And she said, "Dennis, you've been in court more often than the rest of us put together. All of the judges know you. All you have to do is in the halls, call out to whether James Smith or whatever the person's name is, then tell him about the Right Privacy Committee, tell him that you're not a lawyer, tell him that you've been at all these cases, tell him that you will act as his representative, no fee. So go into the court, when his name gets called, present yourself to Judge Perry or whichever one of the judges was there, and say, 'Your Honor, I'm here representing James Doe, and because identification is one of the issues, we'd ask that the officer be excluded from the courtroom before Mr. Doe is called to hear the charges.' Officer out of the room, Mr. Doe stands up, hears the charges, sits down, and the officer comes in. And out of the next 12 who did not have lawyers, I won all 12. Now, I have to admit, 10 of them were falling off a log ID. No questions. But as my luck would have it, 2 of them were really mouthy. And so when they were being charged or arrested, they were, "What the fuck are you doing? I've got my rights." And of course, the officer remembered this face. And so when they came into the court, "Yes, that's the one right there." So I actually had to do a defense of 2 of them. And the one actually lasted a full day. But I'd been to all the trials up to that point. I had all the cases in my briefcase. And I proceeded to run the full defense. And I was successful. And those 2 I'm really proud of. We had a lot of wins. We had a whole lot of wins. The public very quickly came on side. The media quickly came on side. And so those were things that really helped us move things forward. And the end results were that affected organizing as we went forward into the future. 1, we as a community really learned how to organize. Second, we developed strategies around organization such that when HIV really became an issue, the AIDS Committee of Toronto actually used the original constitution of the Right to Privacy Committee to set up its organization. And people went from working in the Right to Privacy Committee, just morphed into the AIDS Committee of Toronto, and so that helped that committee group get going. The City of Toronto matured as a city that came to accept the diversity of sexualities slowly at first, but eventually there was a turning point, and this was the turning point where things really did get changed around. After the Bathhouse raids in a few years, the province of Ontario finally adopted sexual orientation into their human rights code. And we have other commissions that came out of it, the Brunner Commission, and looking at police activity and trying to figure out what they had done wrong. So anyway, thank you very much. I think I'm over my time. I got the roundup.
Thank you, Dennis.